Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Probably not as good as the rest of these, but here's mine anyway. It's one of the reasons I started believing in the paranormal. Be me. 17 years old. 1993. In the middle of Nebraska near the Sandhills. We just had Christmas at my grandparents' farm in the middle of nowhere. Like the next neighbor was about a mile away in the middle of nowhere. Christmas was cool there. We got the entire extended family together and there were like 40 people in the house exchanging gifts, singing songs and doing the type of shit white people did on farms in the US in the 90s. Everyone goes home except for me. My grandparents were really old and my grandfather could barely walk. My grandma could walk, but it was more of a shuffle and she couldn't climb stairs. Family needed me to spend about a week taking care of my grandparents. Cool. No problem. I love old people and I love my grandparents. Grandparents go to bed. I go upstairs to go to bed, but I'm not tired. I chill listening to my cassette player. It's how we had to listen to music before computers and MP3s. Listening to Nirvana's Nevermind, and trying to go to sleep. Really happy because I loved the solitude of my grandparents' farm and I loved my family. I was basking in the feels that were left over from all the people in the house. I hear someone come up the stairs, but think nothing of it because people were going up and down the stairs all day. This person opens the attic door and goes in. All of the sudden it hits me. Shit my pants.jpg. I am the only person that should be in this house that can actually climb stairs. Holy fuck. Someone broke in. Now my grandma taught me to be a badass. I have literally seen this woman BTFO 2,000 pound bulls that were giving her shit. She was like 100 pounds. That motherfucking bull never fucked with her again. After she did that, she looked at my 9-year-old self and said,
"Never be afraid of anything."
Here's 17-year-old me, remembering that. Remembering my grandma and grandpa needed me to step up and defend them. I wasn't going to back down from shit. If someone broke into the house, I decided they were going to have to kill me before I would let them hurt my grandparents. I get up and grab my great-uncle's baseball bat that was in my bedroom. I open the attic, turn the light, and I was about to fuck some shit up. Side note. That attic was always creepy AF. I never played in there and always avoided it as a kid. I ran roughshod over that farm and every building, but that attic, fuck that attic. It was always cold even in the summer and that house didn't have air conditioning. It was fucking creepy. Back to the story. Adrenaline was pumping. I was ready to kill. I've always trended toward the fight side of the fight or flight response anyway. I was kind of looking forward to a fight at this point. I open the attic door. WTF? No one in the attic. Move some stuff around to see if someone is hiding. Still don't find someone. Fuck it. They must have gone downstairs. I check the rest of the upstairs rooms. No one there. Head downstairs with bat in hand. By this time, Grandma had shuffled into the living room and I turn the lights on. She wants to know why I'm making all the noise. I tell her someone is in the house. Grandma doesn't look excited at all. She just says,
"Go back to bed. I'll tell you about it in the morning."
Chills run down my spine. PNG. I don't believe her. I check the porch. Turn on the yard light. Go outside. Pitch black. Have a flashlight. Wind blowing. Check the tree line. Check behind the house. Nothing. No one at all. Not even tracks. Check the kitchen. Check the living room. Check in on my grandpa who was sleeping. Take a shit and a piss because I was downstairs anyway. Check on grandma. Ask her again how she knew no one was in the house. Again, she says, "Go to bed. I want you to be able to sleep." And refuses to tell me anything. I decide to trust her and make sure the doors are locked again. Then go back upstairs. Took me like 4 hours, but finally I got to sleep at like 3 a.m. Wake up the next day. Grandma, what the fuck happened last night? She said that she hasn't told anyone about it, but there are ghosts in the house. She said she didn't want to say anything because she was worried we would think she was going senile and put her in a rest home, what we used to call assisted living. But she said since I saw it, I just heard it, that she felt like I should know. She made me promise not to tell anyone. I did, and didn't, at least until she died. She said that she would often see an old, stern-looking man with a brim hat looking at her at the foot of her bed at night. There was always a weird glow around him. She usually just pulled the covers over her head and prayed the rosary and the man went away. She also said that when she would spread sheets on top of the bed that they would come to rest upon the outline of a child, like a child was under the sheets, and when she picked up the sheets, the child wasn't there. She said she often heard noises coming from the attic in the night, but no one was in the house. This was a common occurrence. She told me if I heard it again to pray the rosary, and I did every night for the rest of the day when I went to bed. That was it. Never heard it again, but I remember this shit like it was yesterday. When they died a few years later, a neighbor bought the house and demolished it. I miss that farm and I miss my grandparents, but I'm kind of okay that the house isn't there anymore. The house was built around 1900 and someone once tried to put an apple orchard on it, but apples didn't really grow well in the sandhills, so my grandpa tore all of the trees out in the 1940s. I know my grandparents' first child, my oldest aunt, died in that house when she was 2. I think the child that my grandma saw was her. The old dude, I think, was a guy that committed suicide on an adjacent property during the Great Depression. My grandpa and grandma found his body. They eventually bought his farm and made it part of theirs, but his house still stood pretty close to theirs. They used it for storage. The old guy ghost could also have been the guy that built the house and planted the orchard around the turn of the century.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
My grandfather survived the medical convoy massacre at Incheon thanks to a dead man. Be my grandfather, sergeant in the U.S. Army. Weird shit had been happening at his machine gun position for the entire campaign. Snow prints of human bodies around his position. Corpses from the corpse wall they were using as frozen sandbags moving out of position or slowly crawling away. He chalked it up to Chicom chicanery. Kept whipping sentries and blaming them for letting spies into the perimeter. Eventually pulled back due to a wound to a medical convoy making it up to Incheon. Chicom's overrun lines early in morning after fierce fighting. Grandpa was assigned as temp MP as he only has leg injuries so everyone else can dig in. It's blood and fire everywhere, doctors, patients and nurses being shot, mortars going off. Ambulances exploding and throwing shrapnel into surgical operations. He said it was the most horrifying thing of his life. This was a man who machine-gunned waves of infantry. They are getting calls one by one. They aren't taking prisoners and wiping out any who surrender. Red Cross workers fleeing or getting ambushed and dying. His commanding officer returned from foxholes looking like a meat bag, just torn up, bloody, covered in dirt. CO tells GPA they are leaving now, and they need to pick up some nurses farther north. CO sounds weird, like he's talking at a briefing and ignoring Grandpa completely. He is also moving almost like a stick figure. Grandpa chalks it up to shock and blood loss. People died trying to get to the supply depot during the night. It's a no-go zone. CO tells Pat to walk ahead and locate the triage staff. He will grab transport. Grandpa makes it to what's left of triage. He will drive the staff out and God help the survivors. About an hour later, Grandpa gives up hope of seeing his CO. So they begin walking back towards the lines. After only a few minutes, they find the CO. Dead in a Jeep. Jeep has some holes. CO has a lot of holes. What's weirder though is the CO's front part of his body is just annihilated, absolutely shredded, vital organs missing. Grandpa loads everyone up, and the 20 or so medical survivors from the massacre are thanks to that man. Here's the weird part. Grandpa gets leave to do a eulogy for the man and finds out the CO was some sort of superhero. He had a crazy amount of medals, ordered his men to abandon position and assaulted a position with grenades, assumed KIA my grandfather's report about saving them. Brass thinks poor grandfather was confused and it was someone else. Various actions during the night from other survivors at the line. Always right there with supplies, running communications or pulling rank and reforming units. Always through grievous injuries and surviving actions that had no other survivors. Even jumped on a grenade supposedly. Grandpa never talked about his name because he was afraid the dead from Korea would find him, and told me not to do it either or they might find his descendants. He said he'd grown convinced that in Korea in certain places death is more of an inconvenience than an end, and he's not sure what would happen if they found us.
The dead from Korea might find him. I don't get it.
He killed a lot of people. I don't mean like an infantry amount. I mean a lot, like mowing down human wave attacks and then stacking corpses. The ground was too hard to dig, so they got used to stacking frozen corpses around the machine gun and sentry hills for extra cover, and corpse stacks as a huge fuck you to the enemy. On top of that, fanatics on both sides were shooting anyone trying to retrieve the wounded, so he'd spent his nights listening to the wails of the dying. After the first couple US medics were shot, he taught the other GIs in the area old Imperial Japanese war songs. Grandpa also fought in the Pacific, and would sing after every wave. That was as bad as a front as the Eastern Front in World War II. He said when he was first there, a Korean couple starting running alongside their truck with their baby on a ruck, always keeping up and trying to get to the cab. So he, being insane PTSD ex-World War II vet, just shot them with no questions asked. The off-the-boat white GIs flipped the fuck out. XO started tearing him apart when they found out the baby was a bundle of rags and some mines with grenades mixed in, and he got a commendation for it. Those are the stories Grandpa did tell me, so I can't even imagine the stuff he took to the grave.
Here's something you guys might find interesting. I came into possession of this book, PIC related, when my grandmother died when I was a young boy. It belonged to my great-grandfather, who rose from the orphan son of destitute Ohio farmers to the president of a large multinational retail chain. Despite having no education, no familial connections, or money to speak of, he accomplished this and retired a millionaire 20 times over with real estate all over Florida. My father thinks we can chalk this up to great-grandfather simply being a shrewd and innately gifted businessman and the booming economy after World War I. While that may play a part, I think my great-grandfather used the law of attraction. The magic story is split into two parts. The first part tells the story of the narrator's friend, known to be a poor wastrel who goes without food for days. Suddenly, his friend arrives to meet the narrator completely changed, with good clothes, money, the works. The friend tells the narrator that he learned how to get these things from the magic story, which comprises the second part of the book. The magic story itself tells the story of a dock worker living in the 17th century who falls from grace and becomes a depressed, alcoholic vagrant with no friends, no job, no money, etc., and how he turned this around. On the face of it, it looks like a turn-of-the-century self-help book. Yet, the language used in the second half, the story itself, is startlingly similar to Law of Attraction and Neville. Many words and passages were underlined and marked in pencil, presumably by my great-grandfather.
My condition, then, was deplorable, not so much for the body, be it said, as for the mental part of me, which was sick unto death. In my imagination I deemed myself ostracized by the whole world. Well do I remember my awakening, for it came in the night. I had been dreaming of light and warmth and of the repletion of good things. You will say, when I relate the effect the vision had on me, that my mind was affected. It was the dream which converted me to the belief, nay, to the knowledge, that I was possessed of two identities, and it was my own better self that afforded me the assistance for which I had pleaded in vain. Moreover, it was not the dream itself which affected me, it was the impression made by it, and the influence that it exerted over me, which accomplished my enfranchisement. There was a presence with me, intangible, underlined, to others, but real to me. The presence was in my likeness, yet it was strikingly unlike. The brow, not more lofty than my own, yet seemed more round and full, the eyes, clear, direct, and filled with purpose. The whole contour of the face and figure was dominant and determined. It is fear which deported a man's soul from his body and rendered it a thing to be despised. I discovered that constant association with the presence was producing an effect upon me. And one night, when I awoke among the casks and discerned he was present, I made bold to speak. "Who are you?" I ventured to ask. "I am that I am," was the reply. "I am he who you have been, I am he who you may be again. I am the man made in the image of God. There is a plus entity and a minus entity in every human body that is born into the world. Whichever one of these is favored by the flesh becomes dominant. Listen," said the presence, and he towered over me while I cowered abjectly at his feet. To the plus entity of a man, all things are possible. The world belongs to him, is his estate. He fears naught, dreads naught, stops at naught, he asks no privileges, but demands them, he dominates, and cannot cringe, his requests are orders, opposition flees at his approach, he levels mountains, fills in vales, and travels on an even plain where stumbling is unknown. I gazed upon the pyramid of casks in amazement that I had so long made use of it for an abiding place, and I was wonderingly conscious that I had passed my last night beneath its shelter. The secret of being what you have it within you to be
is the last line of the book. So, think of it what you will. But I see many similarities between several passages of this book and what Neville would later teach, and our general understanding of the law. For what it's worth, the man who published this book, Frederick Van Rensselaer Day, LARPed as a millionaire his entire life and thus was constantly out of money due to his beta actions, like putting his last $200 as a down payment on a $100,000 yacht, just so he could be seen for a few minutes as the guy who just bought a yacht. He took his own life in a hotel after telling the desk clerk that he was a fruit baron from California.
Be my grandmother around 25 years ago. Split time working between UK and France. Most of time in UK but around 3 months a year in France. Make friends with one of her colleagues in France, a younger guy called Michael. Welsh but has posh accent because his parents were deaf and learnt to speak through listening to radio. When she's in France her and Michael would get coffee together, chat in breaks, nothing crazy. One time she arrives to work in France and he's not there for the duration. No big deal, maybe he's away or got a new job or something. Another 8 or so months later she goes back to France and he's not there again. Asks another colleague what happened to Michael. Apparently he just sort of didn't show up one day and that was that, no one knows. A few years passed and my grandmother is chilling in staff break room. She looks round and Michael is stood in the doorway. They make small talk, how are you doing, etc. After quick conversation she excuses herself as she has to go and see clients, thinks nothing of it. Later on grandmother is sat with other colleagues and mentions she saw Michael. Suddenly they all start to get mad asking her why she'd say that. She insists she had seen him but they say she is lying. Confused why everyone getting so pissed she asks why she couldn't have seen him. Turns out his body was found a couple of years back. He'd been murdered, no obvious motive and case unsolved. To this day my grandmother is adamant that she saw and spoke to this guy who had been killed years prior.
My maternal grandmother was born on March 3, 1933 at 3 o'clock in the morning and call. She, along with my mother, her third child and third daughter, claim to see spirits and experience premonitions through dreams as well as other abilities. Grandmother has 7 children and none of my mom's brothers and sisters have this gift. I experience things sometimes, more so when I was younger, but have always rationalized it away in different ways. Nighttime was always intense for me, so I would sneak into my parents' bedroom to sleep up until I was like 12. Story. Be 11 years old. Night before my cousin's, dad's side, wedding in a different state. Be sleeping in my parents' bed with my mom. I think my dad had stayed up late packing and fell asleep in his chair in the living room, which he sometimes did. Wake up around 3 in the morning, like I do every night. Notice I am alone. Mom must have left the room at some point. Notice she must have turned the night light I left on off and it is pitch dark. Get up to leave the room. As I am walking towards the door, I see a tall white figure/light in the room, not far from the bed. Looks like a ghost, but I'm weirdly not afraid. Don't stop to examine the figure further, I just head straight to the living room and go to sleep on the couch. Get woken up the next morning by commotion in the kitchen. Hear my mom telling my dad that she couldn't sleep last night because his mom was standing over her smiling. My dad's mom died about 6 or so years earlier. Hear my mom tell my dad that she told my grandmother's ghost that my dad was in the living room and, because she wasn't leaving, she just up and left the bedroom. Don't say anything about what I saw. Quietly shit my pants. Pretty sure I saw my grandmother's ghost, and don't really know how to explain that one away.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.